Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday, Yom Revi'i. Let's light up the darkness. I would like to say who's in the house. But for some reason... Oh, there we go. Come on. There we go. Yehud in South Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck, and thank you for the calendar. Oh, so glad you got it. You liked it. Nina and I worked hard on that. Hopefully everybody who's donated in the last year or two got one of the calendars. It's an awesome calendar. And if you want to make sure you get one next year, please support accidentaltalmudist.org. Guy in Ohio, Bella in Florida, Sharon in New Jersey, Bill in mid-Missouri, Shandora in the Bronx, Lorraine in Texas, Ryan in Jacksonville, Paul in the Great Northwest, Joe in the Inland Empire, Belle in Texas, and Bill got the calendar, yay! Nancy in North Carolina, and if you didn't get it yet, you're probably gonna get it. And if not, maybe we had the wrong address for you. They haven't all reached their destination yet, but I hope everybody who should get one got one. We tried to make sure everybody got one. So if you haven't got it yet, don't panic. Chaim in Florida, Spencer in Connecticut, Frank in San Pedro, Aoife in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday. Go. Okay, our daf today is page 88. We're actually picking it up near the end of 88a with Mishna 11 here in chapter 5. Mishnah 11. A wholesaler, hasiton, a wholesaler, must clean his measuring vessels, which are used for measuring liquids such as oil and wine, once every 30 days, because the residue of the liquids sticks to the measure and reduces its capacity. And the homeowner who sells his goods must clean his measuring vessels once every 12 months, because he doesn't use them as often as the wholesaler. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, actually the matters are reversed. In the case of one who is constantly using his vessels for selling merchandise, the residue does not adhere to the measuring vessel, and therefore the wholesaler must clean his measures only once a year. But in the case of a homeowner who does not sell as often, the residue adheres to the measuring vessel, and therefore he must clean them every 30 days. The theme, obviously, and this is an important Torah law, that you should not have diverse measures. In other words, you shouldn't cheat, not in big things and not in small things. And here they're saying, and you have to be meticulous, even at the smallest level, that you're not even coming close to cheating somebody that you are doing business with. Like if there's a little bit of residue in the measuring vessel, it might throw the measure off just the slightest bit, and that is coming too close to a sin. It's so interesting for me to be reading this today because earlier this morning I was reading Mesilas Yesharim, so the Path of the Just by the Ramchal, Rabbi Luzzatto. I think I've mentioned before, I'm reading just 5 minutes a day during Elul, this final month of the year. This is Musar, right? So the Rabbi Luzzatto, the Ramchal, writes about improving one's characteristics, about really being a more honest, more upright, more righteous, more giving, more kind, and especially more pious person. And reading this 5 minutes a day is something everybody should do, particularly in Elul. And so just today, I was reading about the spiritual lesson that we take from the Torah and our sages' narrow, like really tight focus on being meticulous, not to cheat anyone in those little areas in life where for sure you could get away with it. No one would know but you. and maybe not even you. That's what's really at stake here, because we all have a bias to favor ourselves. And unless we're going out of our way to make sure that we're being meticulous, so we won't be, right? The human nature is to round off in our own favor. And that's what we're being warned against here, that these little areas where you could a million times get away with it, no one would even fault you. Okay, so you rounded up a penny in your own favor. But actually, it's a beautiful spiritual opportunity to drill down and make sure that you're not taking advantage in all these little things in business. Why? Because you fear God, and because you love God, and because you're grateful to God for all the blessings in your life, and you're going to return some of that blessing to God and to your fellow Jews and your fellow humans by being meticulously honest in all your dealings. Okay. A storekeeper who constantly sells merchandise in small quantities cleans his measuring vessels twice a week, and cleans his weights once a week, and he cleans the pans of his scales after each and every weighing to ensure that no merchandise has adhered to the pans, thereby increasing their weight. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said, in what case is this statement that it is necessary to clean a measuring vessel said? With regard to moist items, which are likely to adhere to the measuring vessels. But with regard to dry goods, which do not adhere to the measuring vessels, one does not need to clean his measuring vessels. Now we're on 88b. And before adding the weights and merchandise, the seller is obligated to let the pans of the scale that will hold the merchandise tilt an extra handbreadth toward the buyer by adding a weight to that side. So if the seller weighed for him exactly, i.e. with the scales equally balanced initially, then instead of allowing the scales to tilt an extra handbreadth, he must give the buyer additional amounts, gerumin, and how much of an additional amount? An additional 1/10 in the case of liquids that are sold by weight, and then an additional 1/20 in the case of dry goods. Right? In other words, they didn't have these digitally accurate scales that we have today. How did storekeepers, how did people doing business weigh out liquids and dry goods? You know, they had the scales of justice, right? The old-fashioned scales that we associate with justice. But that's what every storekeeper used, right? So he had the two pans, and in one side he would put the merchandise, and in the other side he would put weights. And that's how they would know how much was in the other pan. And so what they're saying is, okay, so you get to a place where it's even, right? When you've weighed it out, and then you add a little bit to the buyer that you're giving to him to make sure that in case there was any kind of a little mistake, that the weight had something adhered to it, or the weight had lost a little bit of its metal, whatever, just to make sure that if there's any error, it's in the buyer's favor. That's what a righteous storekeeper must do. And the Mishna continues to discuss the correct method of weighing in a place where they were accustomed to measure merchandise in several stages with a small measuring vessel, so then one may not measure all the items at once with a single large measuring vessel. And in a place where they measure with one single large measuring vessel, so he may not measure with several small measuring vessels. In a place where the custom is to level the top of the measuring vessel to remove substances that are heaped above its edges, one may not heap. And in a place where the custom is to heap it, one may not level it. Right? So obviously the theme there, and everything is in accordance with the local custom. And you can see why that's important, because the buyer who walks into the store and the seller who's operating in that neighborhood, they're accustomed to deal with, to buy and sell according to the local custom. If somebody varies from the local custom, then no matter how good his intention is to be fair, etc., there could be a misunderstanding between him and the buyer because they're speaking a different language. He's offering to do things his way. The customer expects it to be done like the local custom, or vice versa. So you got to adhere to the local custom because that's what everybody is expecting. And that concludes the Mishna, Mishnah number 11 here in chapter 5 of Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud. Now the Gemara. The Gemara asks, from where are these matters that the seller must initially let the scales tilt an extra handbreadth derived? So Reish Lakish said the source is that the verse states that one should have a perfect and just weight. Tzedek, right? Tzedek, which is justice or righteous. It's not a word that we normally associate with weights and measures. But as I've explained, that's exactly where one needs to be righteous. And a perfect and a just weight, this is interpreted as an instruction to the seller, be righteous, be a tzaddik, with that which is yours and give it to the buyer. And the Gemara asks, if that is so, then say that the latter clause in which it said, if the seller weighed for him exactly, he gives the buyer additional amounts. But if letting the scales tilt is obligatory by Torah law, how can he originally give him by weighing exactly? Right? So in other words, are we going to set the scale so it favors the buyer a little bit, or are we going to set the scale to be exactly right and then just add a little bit of merchandise at the end? So the Gemara says, rather, it is not obligatory to let the scales tilt. And the first clause is referring to a place where they are accustomed to let the scales tilt an extra handbreadth, right? In that locale, the custom is to first calibrate the scales so it favors the buyer a little bit. And if the statement of Reish Lakish was stated, it was stated with regard to the latter clause that if the seller weighed for him exactly, he gives the buyer additional amounts, meaning in a locale where they don't do that. From where is this matter derived? Reish Lakish said that this is as the verse states, and just tzedek, which indicates be righteous, be tzadek, with that which is yours, and give it to the buyer. And the Gemara asks, and how much are the additional amounts that are given? In other words, how much you have to give a little extra to the buyer? Okay, how much do you have to give him? And Rabbi Abba Bar Memel says that Rav says, in the case of liquids, 1/10 of a litra for every 10 litra. In other words, 1/100th of the total. So it's just a tiny bit extra that you're giving to make sure that the buyer got the deal that he was looking for. And the Mishnah teaches that the seller adds 1/10 in the case of liquids and 1/20th for dry goods. So a dilemma was raised before the sages with regard to what case is the Tana of our Mishnah speaking. Does he mean 1/10 in the case of liquids for every 10 units of liquid? And similarly 1/20th in the case of dry goods for every 20 units of dry goods? i.e. 1/400th? Or perhaps he means 1/10 for every 10 units of liquid, and similarly 1/10 for every 20 units of dry goods, i.e. 1/100th for liquid and 1/200th for dry goods. And the Gemara says, that dilemma shall stand unresolved. Presumably, every locality had an answer for this based on the ruling of the local rabbi. And so you follow the local custom, and they didn't dictate what this should be sort of throughout the land because they follow local custom. Rabbi Levi says the punishment for using false measures, and I read this just this morning in Mesilas Yesharim, the punishment for using false measures is more severe than the punishment for transgressing the prohibition of forbidden sexual relations. Really? Taking like an extra penny when you make a deal? This is worse than incest? Really? How is this possible? Why? As in that case of forbidden relations, it is stated with regard to them a shortened term for the word these. Which when when the word these is used about prohibited sexual relations, the Hebrew word there is el. In the verse, for all these abominations, referring to prohibited sexual relations. And in this case of false measures, it is stated an expanded term for the word these. Instead of el, it says ele. In the verse, for all that do these things, even all that do unrighteously, are an abomination unto the Lord your God. From Deuteronomy 25:16. I think that's in this week's Torah portion. Am I right? And from where may it be inferred that this expression el indicates that the prohibition is severe, based on which it is severe. I'm sorry. And from where may it be inferred that this expression el indicates that the prohibition is severe, based on which it is understood that from the form this word takes indicates a level of severity? In other words, the fact that they use a slightly different word for these, how do we know that that indicates that the law is more severe in one case or the other? And we know this because in Ezekiel 17:13 it is written, and the mighty, ele, of the land he took away. So this word ele, which is being used for these when referring to abominations, in another place is referring to the mighty people of the land, telling us that this is something to pay attention to and that somehow connotes power or something of importance. So the Gemara asks, but with regard to forbidden relations, isn't it also written in a different verse, for whosoever shall do any of these, ele, abominations? So the word ele is used for both false weights and measures and for prohibited sexual relations, albeit in a different verse, then why are you going to say that the prohibition on false weights and measures is more severe than the prohibition on prohibited sexual relations? And the Gemara answers that expression of ele in the context of forbidden relations does not serve to emphasize its severity. Rather, in that verse, it serves to exclude one who uses deception in measures from the penalty of excision from the world to come. Karras, right? So karras is death at the hands of the heavenly court. Sometimes it means that somebody's life will be cut short unless he's able to make a teshuvah, make a repentance. We're not sure exactly what it means. Somebody could be taken young, could be taken before they have kids, could lose years on his life, or could mean a number of things, but it's not good. It's a very serious punishment. You don't ever want to commit a sin whose punishment is karras, right? Excision from the world to come. You might lose your place in the world to come. So the Gemara asks, but if the punishment is in fact less severe, then what is the advantage, meaning in this case the greater severity in the case of false measures? If we're saying that, well, if you violate the prohibition on prohibited sexual relations, you get karras. But if you violate the prohibition on false weights and measures, you don't get karras. Then how can you say that the prohibition on false weights and measures is more severe than the prohibition on prohibited sexual relations? Why do you say that? And the answer is that there, in the case of one who engages in forbidden relations, he has the possibility of repentance. Okay, he did it. He can acknowledge that he did it. He can bring a sacrifice. He can do all the steps of atoning for that violation. But here, in the case of one who uses false measures, there is no possibility of repentance because he has no way of knowing whom he cheated and therefore is unable to return the stolen money. Now, it happens in life that you're, tempted in a moment, you take something that you shouldn't have taken, later you regret it, and you're not able to return it because you don't know who you took it from, or that person, you can't find them. So are you stuck? You can never make an atonement? No, you can make an atonement, right? You can make an atonement. And you can certainly, pray and organize yourself so that the very thought of having a slip like that, where you took something, becomes abhorrent to you, and you become the kind of person that would never do that. And you definitely, have a holy sense of shame about what you did in the past. And you can even pray for the well-being of that person that you stole from. And then at a certain point, once you've done all that you can do, you need to move forward and not wallow in shame. But even that, right, that you in a moment of, just foolishness, you stole something, that is not nearly as bad as somebody who regularly cheats, right? Somebody who has a weight and a weight. You know, he calls both of these weights 1 ounce, right? But he uses a lighter one when he's buying and a heavier one when he's selling, or vice versa, whatever. But he's like always cheating a little bit. And he's just made a habit of cheating. He doesn't even notice that he does it anymore. That, you know, at a certain point, he can wake up to what he's been doing and he can really regret it. But by that point, he has cheated so many different people, he's going to carry that stain, right? He's going to carry that stain with him. Now, he can outweigh the stain with all the other righteous deeds that he does, but he's just never going to be able to make a complete atonement for that. Let's keep going. And Rabbi Levi says, robbing an ordinary person is more severe than robbing the Most High. How do you rob God? Everything is in God's world. What it means to rob God is that you make personal use of something that has been consecrated, something that has been set aside to be a donation to the Holy Temple, or to be given to a Kohen, to a priest, and then you make personal use of it. So that's the transgression of meila, deriving personal benefit from consecrated property. And they're saying that meila is a terrible sin, but robbing an ordinary person is worse. Why? As with regard to this regular robber who steals from other people, the verse states sin before meila. Meaning, the verse said in Leviticus 5:21, if anyone sin and commit a trespass against the Lord and deal falsely with his neighbor in a matter of deposit or of pledge or of robbery or have oppressed his neighbor, and with regard to that one who misuses consecrated items, the verse states the word meila before the word sin. Leviticus 5:15, if anyone engages in misuse, right, misuse of consecrated property, and he sins unwittingly, right? So it stresses sin before meila for robbing another person, and meila before sin when you make use of something consecrated. And the reason is because when you rob a person, as soon as you pick it up, with the intent to steal it, you've already committed the sin. Whereas with something that was consecrated to God, I mean, you can't really steal from God. You're always in God's world. You can't take something out of God's world. And so you haven't actually committed. When you pick it up, you haven't transgressed. It's when you make use of it that you have transgressed that prohibition. Let's keep going here. And Rabbi Levi says, come and see that the attribute of flesh and blood is unlike the attribute of the Holy One, blessed be He. The Holy One, blessed be He, blessed the Jewish people with 22 letters, and he cursed them with only 8 letters. What's he talking about? Rabbi Levi explains he blessed them with the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. From the first, so the Hebrew alphabet begins with the letter Aleph and ends with the letter Tav. Right? So in Leviticus 26:3, it starts if, the word if, which begins with the letter Aleph, if you walk in my statutes, and it ends with until upright, komemiut, which ends in the letter Tav, which is the final letter of the alphabet. And so this is a place where God says, if you will walk in my statutes, I will bless you. And so he blesses with all 20, with a verse that begins with the first letter and ends with the last letter of the alphabet. So it's this sort of, metaphorically, spiritually speaking, that God blesses us all wholeheartedly. God gives, with such open hands. We're constantly receiving from God. And God cursed the people with 8 letters, right? From the letter Vav that begins the verse, Ve'im, and if you shall reject my statutes, until he says so the curses run from 26:15 to 26:43 in Leviticus, and the final one is, and my statutes were abhorred by their soul, which ends in nafsham. So in other words, his blessings extend from the first letter to the last letter, But the curses, they are filled. Those verses begin with the letter Vav and end with the letter Mem, which is 8 letters away. Right? So God would much prefer to bless us than to curse us. He would much prefer that we listen to him and follow the laws that we're supposed to follow so that we don't have to be punished. That God is expressing through the way that these verses are structured, alphabetically, so to speak, that he prefers to bless us than to curse. And yet, Moses, our teacher, who is flesh and blood, he blessed them with 8 letters and cursed them with 22. Right? Moses was trying to, make us understand how important, how vital it is to follow the laws of the Torah. So when he worded it himself, he's saying, and if you follow, you'll be blessed. If you don't follow these laws, you'll be cursed. Well, the first part is with 8 letters and the second part with 22 letters. How so? Because in Deuteronomy 28:1, right, where the blessings and curses are restated, and it shall come to pass, veheya, and if you shall hearken diligently until to serve them le'ovdam, from Deuteronomy 28:1 to 28:14, which ends with the letter Mem, right? So from Vav to Mem is the verses that contain the blessings, and then the verses that contain the curses span 22 letters. He doesn't begin with Aleph and end with Taf. Rather, he begins with Vav and ends with Hey. In other words, he begins with the 6th letter and ends with the 5th letter, so you have to go all the way around to the end and back around. But because there's letters that are side by side, and he starts with the one that comes, the 6th letter, so you have to go around all the way back to the 5th, and that's why it encompasses all 22 letters. But again, the concept is people bear grudges, people, even when they're being good to you and warning you for your own benefit, humans are not as expansive and giving and kind, I mean, how could they be, as Hashem, as God. Continuing on page 89a. The Mishnah teaches that in a place where they were accustomed to measure with one large measuring vessel, one may not measure with several small measuring vessels. In a place where the custom is to level the top of the measuring vessel to remove the substances heaped above its edges, one may not heap it. And where they're accustomed to heap it, one may not level it. Right? Again, local custom. And the Gemara provides a mnemonic for the ensuing laws that are the particulars of following the local custom with respect to what kind of measuring vessels you use and whether you level or heap the stuff on the scale. So the mnemonic is, one may not balance with precision and one may not heap. With market inspectors and with a litra, 3 and 10, fulcrum weights, a thick leveler, you may not do, one may not do. These are just little phrases that are helping people who memorize the entire Gemara, because at one time in history this was all memorized by the sages, and these little mnemonic devices help them memorize it. So the sages taught, from where is it derived that one may not level a measuring vessel in a place where they are accustomed to heap it, and that one may not heap it in a place where they are accustomed to level it? And the verse states, a perfect weight, which indicates that one must use whatever is considered a perfect measuring vessel in that locale, as this ensures that there is no deception or trickery. And from where is it derived that if the sellers said, in a place where they heap, I am hereby leveling, and I am willing in exchange to reduce the price for you. Or he said, in a place where they level, I am hereby heaping, and I am willing to increase the price for you. That the court does not listen to him. Even if he's being honest about how he is diverging from the local custom, and he's being completely open and transparent about that, we still don't allow him to do it. He has to follow the local custom. Why is that? The verse states, a perfect and just weight you shall have. And the addition of the term just beyond the requirement that the weight be perfect teaches that one must keep his weights in a just manner, i.e., that manner employed by the people of the locale. And the sages taught, from where is it derived that one may not balance a scale so that it will balance with precision in a place where they are accustomed to let the scales tilt a handbreadth for the benefit of the buyer? And that one may not let the scales tilt a handbreadth toward the buyer in a place where they are accustomed to balance the scale with precision. Again, following the local custom. How do we know that? The verse states, a perfect weight, which teaches that the weight must be considered perfect in that locale. And from where is it derived that if a seller is set in a place where it is the custom to let the scales tilt a handbreadth, I'm hereby balancing with precision and I'm willing to reduce the price for the buyer, or in a place where it is the custom to balance with precision, if he said, I'm hereby letting the scales tilt a handbreadth and I'm willing to increase the price for the buyer, that the court does not listen to him because the verse states a perfect and a just weight. Even if you're being transparent about diverging from the custom, you don't diverge from the custom. Rav Yehuda of Surah says a homiletic interpretation of the phrase, you shall not have in your house diverse measures. You shall not have in your house means that you will become a pauper who has nothing in his house. In other words, if you habitually cheat other people, you will end up losing everything. What is the reason for this? It is due to the fact that you used diverse measures, one for buying and one for selling, that are different from each other. And the phrase, you shall not have in your purse diverse weights, Deuteronomy 25:13, this is interpreted in a similar fashion. You shall not have in your purse, i.e. you will become a pauper who has nothing in his purse if you do this. What is the reason? It is due to the fact that you use diverse weights. But if you possess only a perfect and a just weight, then you shall have. In other words, you shall have wealth. You shall have a house. And likewise, if you possess only a perfect and a just measure, then you shall have wealth. Like you shall have a purse, like you shall have a house. The sages taught that the phrase, you shall not have, teaches that the court appoints market inspectors to supervise the accuracy of measures, right? The Bureau of Weights and Measures. And the Gemara infers, but the court does not appoint market inspectors for supervising market prices, only that things are being weighed fairly and measured fairly. So the Gemara relates, the house of the Nasi appointed market inspectors for supervising both measures and prices. Shmuel said to his student, the sage Karna, go out and teach them that one appoints market inspectors for supervising measures, but one does not appoint market inspectors for supervising prices. Karna went out and taught them that one appoints market inspectors for supervising both measures and prices. In other words, he violated the command of his teacher Shmuel. Shmuel, hearing what he had done, said to him, what is your name? And he replied, Karna, which means horn. And Shmuel said, let a horn emerge in his eye. A horn, i.e. a growth of flesh, emerged in his eye. And the Gemara asked, and Karna, in accordance with whose opinion did he hold, which led him to disregard his teacher's statement? He held in accordance with that which Rami Bar Chama says that Rabbi Yitzchak says. One appoints market inspectors for supervising both measures and prices due to swindlers, to prevent people from using smaller measures or from selling at a steep price while falsely claiming that they are selling superior quality merchandise. The Gemara discusses several laws related to the cases of the Mishna. The Mishnah taught, if the buyer requested from the seller a litra of a specific item, he weighs for him using a litra weight. And if he asks for a half a litra, he weighs for him using a half a litra weight. If he wants 1/4 of a litra, he weighs for him using a 1/4 litra weight. And the Gemara asks, isn't this obvious? What is this Baraisa teaching us? And the Gemara explains it teaches that one sets weights until this amount, 1/4 of a litra, but not less. If a buyer asks the seller to weigh a smaller amount for him, his request is not granted, because I guess it's going to produce something, they're not accurate enough at that small a scale. You need to be a little bit bigger so that, the deal is going to be reliable. Furthermore, the sages taught, if the buyer requested from him 3/4 of a litra, and there is no weight equal to this amount, so the buyer may not say to him, weigh for me 3 units using a 1/4 litra weight 1 by 1, so that the seller lets the scales tilt by a handbreadth as he measures each 1/4 litra weight. Rather, he weighs the merchandise all at once, as he places a litra weight on one pan of the scale and places on the other pan of the scale a 1/4 litra weight together with the meat that is being sold. I'm so close to done. Questions or comments, please get them in immediately. And the sages likewise taught, in a case where the buyer requested from the seller 10 litra of merchandise, the buyer may not say to him, weigh for me each litra 1 by 1 and let the scales tilt each time, as on every occasion the seller does this, the buyer receives more than that for which he paid. Rather, he weighs all the merchandise at the same time and he lets the scales tilt once for all the merchandise. We want to make sure that the buyer, that the seller is honest and is righteous and gives a little bit extra to the buyer, but we don't make him weigh it out one unit at a time over and over again, where the buyer gets a little bit of that advantage over and over and over again, so that at the end he gets way too much of an advantage, and it becomes a lack of righteousness for the buyer. That's where we'll stop. Just a couple of questions. Sharon, what types of liquids are measured by weight? I guess we would expect that it would be volume. And I'm not sure that we read that we don't use volume, because when they were talking about wiping off the vessels, but I guess, I'm not sure. I mean, the question is, does wine have a different, specific gravity or different specific density than water? Certainly oil and water have different densities. And so weighing by weight could produce a problem, but not necessarily. I mean, if you're just saying, if you know what the weight of the vessel that's going to hold the liquid is, then you could sell liquid by weight. I don't know. I'm guessing that in some places they did volume, in some places they did weight, and where they did it by weight, you had to do it by weight, and where they did it by volume, you had to do it by volume. That's my guess. And Joseph, according to the sages, is every type of sin equal, since it is always against Hashem, or because of different punishments there are levels? That's a great question. Because we are told in Pirkei Avos that we should be as meticulous about a minor mitzvah as we are with a major mitzvah, because we do not know how these mitzvahs, how fulfilling our mitzvahs or how transgressing the commandments is going to be held for us or against us when we when we leave this world and come before the heavenly tribunal. So we should be meticulous in observing every mitzvah. And it is true that every time we violate some kind of a commandment, even if it, involves other people, for instance, the teaching about weights and measures, it's understood that one who violates the law about weights and measures is considered akin to denying the Exodus or denying the Torah, or saying, God doesn't run the world because, hey, he's not going to see that I'm cheating here a little bit. Now, maybe the person doesn't think it through like that, and he thinks he's a pious person, and he just allows himself to be careless, but always in his own favor. And that's why this is such an important matter. So we have to be equally meticulous, but I don't think we can say that all sins are equal, because certainly, some sins are punished with death penalty, some are punished with lashes, some are just punished that, you have to make up for it, you have to give it back, you have to make it good. And certainly we know that in terms of sins against other people, we have to ask them for their forgiveness. Asking God to forgive us for our sins against other people is not going to work. We ask God to help us make an atonement, and we do ask God to forgive us for the fact that, we've sort of besmirched his name when we sin against others, but we still have to ask for the forgiveness of others if we have wronged them. So I think on the one hand, we have to be equally meticulous. On the other hand, I think we can say that some sins are worse than others. That's what I've got for us tonight. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night.